After LA Law, ER was a huge show that came along for you. How did that happen?
Well, when LA Law went down, there I was trying to book a directing career, basically. And you just have to remember there weren't any women. There were hardly any. So I was, at that point, a pretty hot commodity because I came off this giant show, and I had a lot of episodes. It's a real problem for a lot of people, and I say women because that's what I know the best, but so often they get an opportunity to direct on a show that they've been working on. They get 2 or 3 episodes under the belt, and the show goes down. And men can, or we're in a whole new thing now, right? But men could parlay 2 or 3 episodes maybe into a directing career. Women absolutely could not. So there was a period of time that just broke my heart, 10 years ago maybe, where I kept running into women who had been script supervisors and or assistant directors, that's the normal, who had this experience. They finally got their dream, they got their 3 episodes, they thought they were off and running, and the bottom fell out underneath them. And either the show got canceled or something else happened, and now here they were, 50 years old, not likely to get that chance again. And it just happened to me like 5 different times in 1 year that I came onto a show, and there they would be, and that would be the story. And it breaks my heart to think of having that taste and then being deprived of it and having to come to terms with that. I was lucky. That never happened to me, and by the time the various backlashes that have occurred over the years happened, I had so much work done that I didn't fall prey to it. I just kept working. There are a couple of us like that. Bethany Rooney, obviously Leslie Linker Gladder, but there's like 5 or 6 of us that started roughly during the same period of time and managed to weather those waves. In my case, I got booked by Rod Holcomb. And it was a brand new show. I also, when I looked at that pilot, I was like, oh my God, how am I gonna do this? Because LA Law was, big and stodgy, kind of. I mean, it took forever. It took forever to light it. It took forever to work out the camera moves. It took forever. And now I'm going to go on to this show that uses the Steadicam for 50 to 60% of the show. And they lit the set so that it was basically lit. You turned on a bunch of stuff and the whole thing was ready. So I get hired to do this show. I've never done it. It had 10-minute Steadicam shots. And I would lay that whole thing out. And in LA Law parlance, I have 2 hours to go think about something while they set that up. I would lay the whole thing out. I'd turn around, I'd sit in my chair, I'd take a glass of water, and Richard Thorpe, the DP, would go, "Ready!" And I was like, what? It was astonishingly different. It was, as I say, I shot the 4th episode and the 17th episode of the first year. So they didn't know what they had in the first episode at all. Everybody was on pins and needles. All the actors were insecure. They all thought Chicago Hope was going to be the one. They didn't know. By the time I get back on the 17th episode, they are a phenomenal mega hit. Their pictures are on every cover of every magazine in the supermarket. Now they're this big thing. They're full of themselves. They're getting called down to the lawyers at Warner Brothers to be cautioned about sexual harassment. It's like a whole other animal, and it just went from there. I think now, because I really admired John Wells, he was far more democratic than was Stephen. Stephen was pretty much, I wouldn't say a despot, but he pretty much controlled everything. And we were insular. So for many of those years, I really was convinced that we were the best show on television. And I didn't have any time to look at anything else. I remember getting sick once, and I looked at a bunch of other stuff. There was a thing called Max Headroom. Do you remember that? Yeah. And I think they had crime in the title that had Dennis Farina in it. That was
Crime Story, was it?
Yeah.
It's in Chicago?
Was it Michael Mann? I don't know. Anyway, I saw like 4 different things, and I'm going, oh my God, people are really making great television out there, and I didn't know because I was just so in the LA law world. So to get out there in that first year and to do ER and all those other things, it was quite a challenge for me. I was actually worried that because I was so much a part of the inner circle, that I wouldn't be able to translate what I had learned into the outside world, that I would only be able to do LA law. But the fact is we had pretty much encountered everything in the course of that 8 years, and I really did have the tools to move on. So I think ER was one of the first things I did. And I worry about that a little bit. I worry about, and I will say this. I say this because I went to go do the new version of Hawaii Five-0. And all the people who were there producing that first year were from 24. So now, there they are over in Hawaii. I used to own a house in Hawaii. I have a very strong connection to the place. And here are all these people over there, not paying attention to where they are, expecting the whole thing to work like it did on 24, and saying over and over again, well, on 24, we did it this way. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, did I do that? Was I that person? Did I? And in all likelihood, I was, because I was so convinced of the rightness of the Botchko way that I'm sure I was a total asshole. And it has made me want to go back and say, did I do that? I really apologized for that. It's really funny.
In that ER was its own animal, if you will. Gosh. Did your work on St. Elsewhere, did that inform your work doing ER at all, or whole new learning curve? What?
Whole new learning curve. New people, new producers, new expectations.
And I'm talking about it being a medical show.
Medical shows. I mean, once you've done, it's fascinating to me that people who embark upon a legal show, the thing that worries them the most is shooting the courtrooms. I can shoot the courtrooms from my bedroom with my eyes closed because I shot so many of them. And it's kind of like that. Medical shows have a certain set of tricks and tools. Once you've figured out how that happens, you can apply them to everything you do from that point forward. I feel like that anyway. Every show teaches me something. Every show gives me a way out of a problem. Every show has contributed to everything I've done. Even ones I don't like, I learned something from them. So I would say I wouldn't make a direct correlation with those two things, but I'm sure there is some connection.
Can you talk a little bit about the style, the shooting style of ER? What did you have to learn after all the experience you had to pull that off?
I had to learn that you get no time out. I had to marshal my energies very differently because you just went from gargantuan scene to gargantuan scene to gargantuan scene, and that was the biggest part of the learning curve. I will say that at the very beginning of that show, even though they knew that they were going to be Steadicam dependent, they had a terrible Steadicam operator at the beginning. And so working with him was exhausting. He would say after take 10, I think I got it now. I think I get it on take 11. And it demoralized everyone and made the process excruciating. By the time I got back, they had hired this phenomenal person named Guy B., with whom I'd worked up in Seattle, and another director had worked with him in Seattle and actually suggested him to them. And there he was in his parachute pants, so great, so that I would set something up, and as I was working with the actors or working with a ridiculous propage or whatever the thing was, Guy was always in there figuring out how to make that idea better, how to perfect that shot, just always working so that by the time you finally shot it, it was 30-40% better than I had imagined. He was fabulous.
Because those sets were so self-contained, I mean, they even had ceilings in the hallways. I remember from my set visit. Was the lighting was it a different challenge, the way that the show was even lit?
Well, you bring up an interesting point because they purposefully designed that set to match the hospital where they shot the pilot, and purposefully shot no walls, built it so that walls didn't move. Their idea was that they wanted the awkwardness of having to make your way in a real set. I was aghast at this. But they did have this very economic way of lighting, which was far less movie lighting. It was far more realistic, so it was harder on the actors, but it was fast. It was really fast. They lit from the ceiling. But I do remember walking in the very first time, having just come off the experience of being on the same sets for 8 years. And I looked, it was their only standing set. The hospital was their only standing set. And the floors of the operating rooms were this herringbone, maddening herringbone pattern that they had copied in linoleum from the hospital where they shot the pilot. And I'm looking at this thing that is like vibrating off the floor. And I said, yeah, so I kind of wonder how long it's going to take for somebody to come in and shoot that floor with a shotgun because they just can't stand to look at it anymore. And one of the writer-creators, whose name I can't remember, heard me and goes, oh no, this set is fantastic. It's so real. It's blah, 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 blah. Well, as time went on, they reconstructed it so that every wall would move. They rebuilt, they added, they went on trips, they shot outside. They did everything that you might imagine when you've got a show that runs so successfully for so long. But the opening stage of it was pretty interesting.
You directed an episode of My So-Called Life. Another producing team, Herskovitz and Zwick, well known for 30-something. How did that come to you?
can I tell you the story of that?
Sure.
It is really funny.
Yes.
Actually, that show was Winnie Holtzman's show. It was under the umbrella of Ed and Marshall, but it was really Winnie Holtzman's show. And she wrote it, the syntax of it, the feel of it was Winnie. I get asked to come in for an interview. They want to hire me, but they wanted me to come in for an interview. I was in the middle of shooting NYPD Blue. The script supervisor was the only other woman on the set at that time of NY. It changed, but at that time it was Susie and me, period. I was in my male energy mode. I'm kind of like this. And I go in for this meeting. There is Scott Wynant, who is the most androgynous person you ever met, who is the producer. There's Winnie, who has all this curly hair and glasses and speaks with her hands like this. There's another woman producer. There's Alan Poole, who's gay. And there's me in this room. And I'm sitting like this. And I take a look at them. I'm sorry, I probably screwed that up. I take a look at them and I think, okay, you need to sit back in the chair and get your female energy going. So Winnie starts to talk. Now, Winnie Holtzman is the first woman to graduate from Princeton. She is phenomenally smart. And she covers it with all this. And at that time in our lives, it was necessary to cover being that smart. And I just had to figure that out about her. So she starts to talk to me about that episode. It was right when Claire Danes wanted to leave. It was Christmas. They were unclear about their contract negotiations, whether they were going to continue or not. She said...
This was season one, the finale of season one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
She said it may, in fact, be our last episode, but we're hoping not. So I wanted to have the flavor of the previous episode so that we can reflect back, but I don't want it to feel necessarily like the end. I had looked at all their episodes. Scott Wynant had directed 5 or 6 of them. Mark Pesnarski had directed 5 or 6 of them. And I said, I want to shoot your show. But from my old producer frame of mind, wouldn't it be better to have either Mark or Scott shoot this, since they so much understand the language of the show? And Winnie looks at me, and the fact is, Scott had just shot the Christmas episode and he was exhausted. And, there was things, but she basically looks at me and she goes, no, we've decided that you have come here to shoot this episode for us. And I was like, okay, this is like such a different world from NYPD Blue. I'm on board. And it was, once again, a truly, truly remarkable experience for me. Everybody was sick. Christmas was happening. All the other kids were really insecure because their futures were based on what Claire was going to do, and they were worried. I had one of my favorite ADs with me, a woman named Connie, and the script was late. So I'm freaking out because I didn't know whether the amazing rhythm and syntax of that movie was something that Winnie let the actors bring in because they were all kids. Was this something that evolved? Was it on the page? how was I going to get that? Because it was so palpable. I get the script finally. Winnie has written it, and everything was there. The pauses, the hesitations, the periods in weird places, the way the show sounded and felt was on the script. It was phenomenal to me. Absolutely phenomenal. So I immediately understood what I had to do. And then I will just tell you one other story on myself, which is that they had read-throughs. And that's, I think, was maybe one of the first times that I was exposed to read-throughs. All the kids came in. We're in the middle of the read-through. I'm watching all of them, as I want to do. And somebody comes in and sits next to me. And I'm looking, and I turn to look at this person, and it's Jared Leto. And Jared Leto was the singularly most beautiful person you ever saw in your life. His skin was gorgeous white, and he had these eyelashes, and his profile was fabulous, and these Weimaraner blue eyes. And I found myself staring at him. And I am staring at him, and I'm staring at him, and I finally said, you have to stop this. You have to stop staring at him. He's not going to like this, clearly. And I literally had to take my hand and go like this so that I wouldn't look at him anymore. And the story that I had was a Cyrano de Bergerac story with Jared and this other kid. And I thought they were so brilliant that I really wanted to have a feature script that was a buddy movie for these two kids at that moment in time. I didn't have it, unfortunately, but I gotta say, that was one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. It was great.
Your experience directing him and also Claire Danes, what was that like? I mean, was it easy to do, or was it a real challenge, or where did that fall?
No, I mean, Claire is profoundly talented, and she was 15, so she was unlike anything I'd ever seen. She was touchy, a little, but it didn't matter because anything she did was absolutely fantastic. And once Jared got used to me and I got over him, he was just great and funny. He was really funny, and the script was funny. So I felt bad for the people who played the parents, because they always, on these shows where they're featuring the teenagers, they're the last thing. They're important, but they're the only ones who don't have time constrictions. So you got to get the kids out of there, and then the poor parents have their scenes at the end of the night, at the end of the day. But they also were, it was just a really fabulous experience, fabulous cast. And the episode was wonderful, so.
So you described how coming up to this episode, they didn't know if they were picked up or not, but there was an awareness that they might not. So I assume from that there were there any alternate endings or anything shot, or it was pretty much shot like
I don't think
written?
so.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. One of the themes of the thing was the next door neighbor. I'm so sorry, I feel so disrespectful that I can't remember his name, but was in love with her, and he was the good kid, and he loved her, and he paid attention, and she was in love with Jared Leto. And so in this episode, Jared Leto prevails upon the next door neighbor to write him love letters for her because he's a doofus at it, and he does, but she finds out that it's actually the kid next door, and there's this scene wherein all season long you've known this kid loves her, and he she is about to go to him. And so in a way, it was the culmination of the whole series, and it was a very satisfying moment. And then the Jared Leto character shows up. And I just remember shooting this shot where here's this kid, this lovely, wonderful next-door neighbor kid, and you hear Jared's voice, and you pan over, and here comes Jared Leto. And my emotional experience was, oh, this poor kid. There's just no way. There's no way he's going to win with this guy. And that's how it ended, was she went off with Jared. But I don't remember there being any finality to it. What I wanted to achieve was its remarkable flavor. And I felt like I did that.
So the actor who played the character Brian Krakow was Devin Gummersall?
Devin Gummersall, yes. Right. I love Devin. Please forgive me for...
And Jared's character was Jordan Catalano. That was...
What was his name?
Jared Leto's character was
named...
Jordan...
Catalano.
Right.
Devin. Love Devin.
So the scene where Angela gets in the car, Angela played by Claire Danes, got in the car with Jordan, that's pretty well known. What was that like to shoot?
I just know we were shooting that whole last sequence at night, and it all had, I don't actually remember any particular about it other than that the whole thing had this remarkable feel to it, this remarkable emotional, connected feel.
Also in that last episode, there was a storyline where the character Ricky, played by Wilson Cruz, says out loud for the first time that he's gay. What do you recall about shooting that scene? It was, I mean, there hadn't been, I don't think, any openly gay teen characters in primetime TV at that time.
I think Ricky was probably the first.
Maybe about how you handled it, or how, since it was sort of a pioneering kind of a scene.
Well, first of all, it was important to find out who Ricky was. And then all I tried to do was take care of him. Just make him feel comfortable and support him. And he was wonderful. So, sometimes I used to think that I had to have something to say, and that was the job of a director, that I had to say something and I had to make actors do something else. But as time goes on, I feel actually the less said, the better. And if it's going well, say only praise, only praise. And Ricky was phenomenal. So that's all I remember.
Okay. NYPD Blue, you directed a handful of episodes, fairly early in the run. It premiered in '93, and your episodes, well, they span from '94 to '96, so a few episodes. So how did that come to you?
Well, it was a Bochco show, and I shot 6 of them. The whole tenor of the show and things that were happening changed after that, and I went off to other things. But I think I might have been the first woman to shoot the show. I could be wrong about that. But by that time, I was, Joanne really and I were the 2 women directors in the Bochco outfit.
Oh,
so
Joanne Fogel?
Yeah.
Right.
Joanne and I, and so I shot Civil Wars, I shot Murder One, I didn't shoot Total Recall, I didn't shoot Doogie Howser because I was producing LA Law. So anything that happened in a different schedule than LA Law, I shot. And then LA Law went down, and I think they hired me to shoot that following season, two episodes. I shot a total of 6. And once again, Greg Hoblet had created a whole new style, a new way of telling a story, and you had to learn it. And it was great. It was so great, but so revolutionary. You never turned around on the characters. You shot within like a 200-degree proscenium stage. Whatever you could shoot at whatever angle, you could shoot that way, but you tried never to turn around. L.A. Law was 2 eyes, straight on. The close-ups had to match. The overs had to match. Everything was like, I remember shooting once an episode in which I shot off-angle stuff, and Rick Wallace took me into the office and go, why did you do that? And I said, because I'm going to shoot myself if I have to shoot those same shots again. I had to do that. So I get into NYPD Blue, and it was like, whoa, this is awesome. And the other part of their style was you just kept shooting it from the same direction, so you shot wide in the same direction. Then you'd go into a mid-size in the same direction in any angle that you wanted, but still in the same direction. And then you punched in for the close-ups in the same direction. And my initial mistake, my first mistake, was that I felt like everything was supposed to be perfect. So I shot like 200 versions of the wide shot and exhausted the actors, and learned very quickly that 1, possibly 2 versions of that wide shot were all you needed or all you ever wanted to do, and then you really had to get into the important material. But the very first time I shot that show, I think I shot hundreds of thousands of feet of film, because it was such a great show, and I so wanted it to be good, and I missed the point, you know.
And those actors were pretty expert at repeating their same business, right? So it would match?
They would match. Dennis Franz is an alien. He's so great, so fast. He's such a fast study. He was able to embrace the kind of craziness that happened on that show as time went on. He could get pages in the moment, look at them, and figure out the scene and do the scene. Not everybody could do that. I mean, I think that's what happened to Jimmy. Jimmy was a much more careful, slower study. And when it got to David Milch being down on the set going, okay, you say that, and you say that, it ultimately he just didn't want to do that.
Jimmy Smits you're talking about.
Yeah, I am talking about Jimmy Smits. I did not shoot the year with
David Caruso.
Thank goodness.
Okay.
So I can't tell you anything about that.
So you brought up David Milch, and it's pretty famously known in his own interview even that he did with us, but also in published stories, that he was often late at delivering scripts, but they were brilliant scripts, but he would come down for a set visit. So did you experience that in the episodes you did? I mean, was that part of the formula of doing that show? And then how did it affect everybody, not just crew, but cast also?
Well, okay, so let me just say that in the first 3 years of the show, David was far more contained than he got. So it was far more normal than the crazy stories that one hears. David, along with Winnie Holtzman, I count as one of the 5 greatest writers I've ever worked with. I would walk across the country to do anything that David wrote and participated in. You couldn't miss a meeting with David, a tone meeting with David. Not only was it the best entertainment you were going to have all month, but he was so insightful that you could entirely miss the point of a scene if you didn't listen to him talk about what it was supposed to be about. I, in fact, also shot this show called Brooklyn South that he took over And he wasn't as available, and there was a scene that I didn't understand. And I asked the showrunner what the scene was about, and he said this, and I went, no. I call up David, and he spins this thing about this scene, and I thought, if I hadn't had that conversation, I never would have understood this scene. He was brilliant and generous and caring, and I learned a lot from him. And I, as I say, had the benefit of him being pretty well in hand during that period of time. So I know that toward the end of the show, he just stayed on the set, lay there, made up the scenes, and told everybody what to do. And it was the job of the directors to just like implement. I didn't have that experience. I had great revelatory experiences with him.
Is it fair to say that Hoblet set the sort of the visual style of the show, but Milch it's even called Milch speak? You know, the way that sentences were said that really seemed to reflect an authentic New York style, or at least simulate that.
Yeah.
Is that really is that the essence of their two contributions?
Absolutely. I mean, Greg was the style maker, and Greg was that for Stephen Bochco before he worked. I can't remember whether David worked on Hill Street Blues or not. I think he did.
I think he did.
But I didn't encounter the whole shebang until NYPD Blue. And Greg was the visualist and the style maker and the experimenter in terms of visual approach. And they had this guy named Bill Clark, who was their police
cop.
detective,
Yeah.
a real cop,
Yeah.
who he became a detective because he helped solve the Son of Sam murders when he was 27. So he was a young detective, and he was this big Irish tough guy. Can I tell one story about this?
Yeah.
And they recruited him, and originally he was just an advisor who was still in New York and still a cop. And then he moved to LA, moved to Rustic Canyon, became a producer, and was still a really significant member of that family. So one day I'm shooting in NYPD Blue, and I've got a scene where the two less macho cops are coming in to bust these two skells, as they call them, in this flop house. And one of them's hiding in the dirty laundry and blah, blah, blah. And neither of these two guys had cop body language inherent to them. So I called up Bill, and I said, Bill, come down and show me how this goes. And so he comes down, and he goes, okay, where are the guys? And there's this guy who's a New York actor who's hiding in the dirty clothes, and he pulls him out of the dirty clothes, and he puts him up against the wall. And the guy starts to cry and collapses into a puddle and says, deja vu, deja vu. And Bill drops him, and I go, okay, I got the whole thing. It takes me like an hour to get this guy back. Cut to a couple of days later, I'm having lunch with Bill. And I said, Bill, I need you to do to me what you did to him, because I could not see it. And it was profound. And he says, I can't do that to you. You're Elodie. You're my little Irish Elodie. I'm not going to do that. And I said, no, you would be doing me a great service if you did, because I really need to know how you control these situations. So he takes me by the cuff of my shirt, and he rams me up against the wall, and he digs this knuckle into my then bony chest. And it paralyzed me. It was like a violation of my body and my soul. And there was nothing I could do. And it was his knuckle in my chest. And I went, oh, I get it. And I never would have known that. I couldn't see it. It was really great. It was a really great experience. He was mortified at having done it to me, but it worked.
Part of the revolutionary nature of NYPD Blue wasn't just the way it looked and Milch's brilliant dialogue. I mean, I remember the first time I ever heard the term reaching out or lawyering up was, I think, NYPD Blue.
Right.
But also, Bochco had to really fight with the networks a lot. That show is known for one that also broke many boundaries in terms of language, nudity. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Well, yes, I can. Stephen, you have to understand, loved to fight with them. And David hated it. David would erupt and react to them and then insult them and march off in a fit. Stephen understood that game, and he understood who they were, and he loved, I used to listen to the conversation, his side of the conversations. I can't even tell, I mean, my first exposure was on LA Law when he was having like an hour conversation with one of the network executives about how much crack we could show on this woman's behind when she was standing away from us facing the desk. I mean, it went on and on and on. I couldn't believe it. But he loved that, and he won a lot. So they were a great pair during that period of time because Stephen understood who David was and understood his genius and protected him from the stuff that he couldn't handle and handled it. Stephen was a great administrator of a company and people. And that relationship, I used to watch that relationship, and it was very impressive. He just, he wanted to push the envelope, and he wasn't afraid to fight.
I'd read that he really came at it like a negotiation, where sometimes he would actually add a dialogue, knowing that he'd have to pull back some. But is that what you experienced? Yes, Stephen Bochco.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like what there's the joke in the editor's world about just put a shot in upside down so that they'll notice that and they won't pay attention to the other things you did. Stephen would do that. He would push it as far as he could and then figure out where he was willing to settle.
Okay, another medical-based show, Nip Tuck, came along for you. Was this the first time that you worked with Ryan Murphy?
No.
No.
You are really nailing the really significant moments in my life. No, I shot Ryan's actual first series before he was Ryan Murphy. It was a little teenage show called Popular. And once again, I walked into a situation. It was under the umbrella of Michael Robbins' company, so it was still kind of an outflow of the Bochco world and et cetera. And Ryan was unique and wanted to do things that blew my mind. And it was so far away from the normal over-the-shoulder storytelling. It was outrageous and hysterical. One time I had to call him and say, come down here and talk to me about what you want to have happen in this scene, because Mary Cherry was in a cornucopia, and it was like, and so Ryan comes down and he just goes, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I'm going, wow. Okay, so he was a new language for me. But I shot 6 episodes of that. I think the next thing he did was Nip Tuck. I shot 10 episodes of that. I shot 6 episodes of Glee. I shot one, and then I got banished. And then I shot 1 episode of Roanoke, American Horror Stories.
Wait, back up. You said you got banished? Is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Is that something you want to talk about, or?
Well, it does seem to be kind of, I don't know whether other people have this relationship with Ryan, but I do. I felt so much a part of his family and his company. I have no idea what happened after 5 episodes of Glee, but suddenly they didn't call me for the next year. I was devastated and heartbroken. It took me months to get over that feeling because it was such a special, the material was so special. And cut to a year later or something, I don't know even how long later, I'm going to shoot Animal Practice on the Paramount lot, and I round the corner and I literally run, physically into Ryan. And Ryan said, "Elodie, oh my goodness, how great to see you." Blah, 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 blah. Off we go. And 3 days later, I have an offer to shoot his half-hour The New Normal. And I realized that whatever I did, whatever seemed like a legitimate reason, he didn't give it a second thought once it had been made, once that had been made. And I suffered. So I learned something, and I decided that I wouldn't ever let that happen to me again. So I then shoot 5 of 12 of The New Normal, and then I went back to shoot another episode of Glee toward the end. I can't remember, I shot the last episode that Corey Monteith was in, and then I shot one more after that. And I got banished again. And I think part of the issue of this is that you never know. And so often this is the case on any show. If you've done something they don't like, they don't tell you. So you're out there in the ethers trying to figure out what it was you did. And I really wish there were a mechanism for actually helping people to do better. But I don't know what that was. And then a couple of years of American Horror Story go by. And then my agent gets this call from Ryan and or his people saying, "We need Elodie to shoot this episode." And it wasn't convenient for me. It was a problem. And we're trying to maneuver around it, and Ryan was Ryan. And Ryan says, "No, she must, I have to have her, and she has to come and she has to shoot this episode." So I do. I go, I shoot this episode of American Horror. It was, once again, revelatory. I had so much fun. It was such a different style of shooting. It was so challenging, and I was so happy with it. It got reviewed all over the place as being the best episode of that season, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's it. I've been banished again. And I've not worked for him since. So that he changed my life without question. Every single time I've worked for him, it's been mind-blowing. And this is part of it. So I don't know whether I should have talked about that or not.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people have experienced something similar, but also clearly he sees great value in you for whatever it is specifically that he wants.
Whenever it
whatever
it occurs to him.
But getting back to what you initially said when we were talking about Nip Tuck at the beginning, about his whole, when you first encountered him on Popular and then that show, the kind of blow your mind aspect. Was that, you spoke about sort of visual, but was it also content that was part of that?
It was content. I mean, the visual is one thing or another, but it was content. The things that he, in Nip Tuck, the situations that he put me in, that he made me deal with, were just, I can't even, mind-blowing. I was close to 50, I guess, and I'm having I'm shooting scenes with transsexuals having sex with the sun, and I'm shooting amazing, weird operations of people whose silicone has leaked into their bodies, and I'm shooting Julian having sex on the glass desk with a limber, plant-watering girl whose legs are so limber that they're every single episode, I was like, there was a little part of my brain going, I don't think my mother thought this is what I was going to be doing at this point in my life. It was so much fun for that reason. I am eternally grateful to have those years on Nip Tuck. It was amazing.
Can you compare Nip Tuck at all to either St. Elsewhere or ER?
Oh, there is no comparison because there's no Ryan Murphy. So Ryan Murphy's not interested in the ordinary. I don't know that I ever did an episode that just had a common medical problem that was dealt with. They were always just phenomenally weird.
In that Murphy has directed quite a bit now. Was he ever giving you input in terms of directing episodes you did for his shows? Or did he leave you alone? Or
no, he left only if I asked. He actually, my impression was he really liked what I did because, they hired me to do the first episode of The New Normal, and then I kept getting asked to do more and more and more, and they kept saying, well, why are you hiring her for all those things? And I go, she kind of produces the best episodes, so we sort of have to honor that. And I don't know what the preface of that conversation was like, she's such a pain in the ass, why do you hire? I don't know. But I do know that I was under the impression that he really liked it. And so for the most part, he doesn't step into that space for other people. And his view of directing has really evolved over time. It's very different than it was when he first started. So those conversations might be different now than they were then. He was so committed to style that the whole thing about getting people to actually have real emotions and do all of that stuff wasn't of much interest to him at the very beginning. Now, his work is so rich that I'm assuming he's incorporated all of that into his work.
From what you said, the content of Nip Tuck went pretty far a lot of times. What about the challenges of actually shooting it? Was that more challenging than your other experiences, or was it just something you could tackle because of your experience?
I'm trying to decide whether to be diplomatic or truth-telling. That was the difficulty of that show was the cameraman. That was hard. Over the years, it was hard. And at the time, he was he was Ryan's special person, so there was no getting around it. He made life kind of hard. But otherwise, shooting it was hysterically fun. Just to try to figure out how to shoot these outrageous scenes and in the funniest possible way. That was, how much better could you get? That was really fun.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about working with the cast of Nip Tuck. I'm sure you know that
things change as years go by. And one is very lucky to shoot the first year of any show, because you get everybody on their best behavior, and everybody's excited, and things, you know, as they got more and more popular and more famous, Julian got a little problematic. But the relationship between those two men, on and off screen, was remarkable, and they changed each other, and they loved working with each other, and they were so different that it surprised and scintillated both of them. And so it was great working with them, actually. And the what? Shit, I'm having a brain fart.
You trying to remember the name?
The wife's name. I loved her, Vanessa Redgrave's daughter.
Oh, Jolie Richardson.
Thank you.
Right.
And I had so many amazing adventures with the son, whose name was.
The son was John Hensley?
Yes,
yeah,
John Hensley.
Okay.
They were really pretty great. And then there were these things like they cast Vanessa Redgrave. I grew up looking at Vanessa Redgrave. She was in those fabulous movies of the early 70s that I cut my teeth on. So to get this iconic English person to try to direct, that's always, to me, it's a little daunting. To have to really deal with them like they're just a normal actor, and they actually want guidance and help and direction when you're still kind of in awe of them, is always a little bit of a challenge.
One of the other juggernaut shows of Ryan was Glee, that you mentioned. This was a show that was very musical. I mean, it was, I guess, I mean, I know Cop Rock did it years before, but failed. But Glee seemed to have a really hit of popularity vein there. In directing it, every episode seemed to have multiple musical numbers in it.
Yeah.
So how was that different for you, coming from more, you know, straightforward narrative directing?
Well, the thing about that show was, once again, I shot all those, how many did I shoot the first year? But they were just they were grappling with how to produce an enormous show of that size. And as long as they had the scripts on time, they could get the rehearsal time, and they could get the choreography time, and we could design how we were going to shoot the musical numbers. As long as all of that happened, it was all script dependent. But Ryan is notoriously late, and so in my mind, I kept saying, as long as these scripts keep coming, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine, and. Then they stopped coming on time, and what they had to do was develop kind of a, what was the word you used earlier, a format, a way in which they would approach the competitions, the way in which they would approach the musical numbers that took place in the rehearsal room, the way in which they would approach the things that happened in the hallway.
Formula?
They got formulaic.
Okay.
To a certain degree, because they had to. Because what wound up happening was that they had to do it on the fly. And one time I had an episode where the stuff was so late, and now we're many years into it, and the kids aren't as devoted to being ready and being prepared or anything else. And I was shooting a performance musical piece on the stage, and the kids came out to do it for me once so I could see it. Hadn't seen it. you know, at the beginning, you got to see the things in advance, and then you could go off and make your plan. But this time, we're shooting. They all come onto the stage to do this giant musical number. They don't know half of it. They're fumbling around. They kind of get the blocking, and they're kind of doing it, and actually, it's so bad that I'm ready to just run for the hills. But they're so used to it now that they didn't even really think it was that bad. And I turn around and look at the camera crew and I go, what do I do? And they said, well, we found that given this circumstance, the best thing to do is to go inside the number and shoot the close-ups first, which is the opposite of what one normally does. One normally starts wide and moves in. So shoot the close-ups first, get inside there, get the cameras in there, do all the Steadicam and the handheld stuff. And by the time we make those passes, 3 or 4 or 5 passes of that, they'll know the blocking. They'll pretty much have it down. And then you can pull out and see how it gets orchestrated, and then you can pull out, and by the time you get out there, they'll look like what they're supposed to look like.
So it's like rehearsing it while they're doing it, it seems like.
That is exactly what happened. I was terrified. We started shooting. We got close-ups. We pulled out. It got a little better. And by the time we got out, fully out, they were on it.
But when you said earlier about by this time, so many years into the show, this sort of idea of shoot it on the fly, I'm thinking these musical numbers were very involved, though, in terms of they were lip-synced, I assume, and so there was production that had to happen and pre-recordings that had to happen?
Yes.
Beforehand, right?
All that stuff had to happen before.
But no choreography, I guess, until you hit the stage, it sounded like.
Well, it's the thing that lost out, because they had to do the pre-records. They had to do certain things that we couldn't shoot the sequences without. But the choreography could sort of get made up as we went along if it had to, and they got incredibly good at it. He had a phenomenal collection of people working for him on that show. And everybody just, you know, it's kind of like what happened on NYPD Blue, or this began in the latter stages of LA Law. Scripts started to become late. The first 3 or 4 years of LA Law, they were on time every day. Then they started to get late, and everybody panicked. The department heads panicked. Everybody panicked. We can't do this, we can't do it. And then somehow it would happen. The show would go on, and the props would arrive, and blah, blah, blah. And then everybody got used to the idea that they could hold that back and that it would all happen. Nobody ever failed. Nobody ever didn't come to the party. So it became the norm. And everybody lost sight of how much better it could be if you had a little practice. It's fascinating that it's, you know, sometimes I'll encounter showrunners who are on it, who know the importance of getting that script in time for everybody to get ready. But very often they saw Aaron Sorkin do it, so they think that they can do it even though they're not as talented and their scripts aren't as good and they have problems that have to be resolved. It's really, you know, there's a part of me that loves that loves just, okay, let's like make a show. Let's hand me those pages. Let me see if I can do that now. There's part of me that loves that, but I don't think it improves the material.
And even Sorkin, toward the end of, there were problems at the end of West Wing about that. His involvement in the show, even. Right?
Yes.
Right. And brilliant writers though, like Milch and what you were just talking about. You said you directed the last episode with Corey Monteith.
Yeah.
Obviously, nobody knew about the tragedy that would happen later. what was it like working with him, one, and two, your reflection on what happened to him in real life?
Corey, I loved Corey. I loved Corey. Corey was a real human being, a sweetheart, and always a little bit uncomfortable with where he'd arrived. And as opposed to being rabidly ambitious or charting their course into the distance, you know, Corey was, I loved Corey. But he was a troubled kid, and I can't remember the particulars of his childhood, but he had addiction problems from the get-go. He was sober for a lot of the time that I worked with him. I know that he had had one falling down somewhere in the course of the tenure of the show. And then he had gone to rehab and he was sober and everything was fine. By the time we got to that episode, something was wrong. And I didn't, because I'd been gone, I'd been banished for a while, I didn't really know what the particulars were, but I knew that Corey was not well, not working properly. And things would happen. He would I don't know how to describe it. He would get incredibly anxious and throw a fit about having to do something that surprised me. I wouldn't have thought it would be an issue. But there was also an AD, a wonderful, wonderful AD on that show who was sober and worked his program a lot and had been very important to Corey. And he said to me, he's in real trouble. And he had, you know, he was living in a big house with a lot of people and there was stuff going in and out and he'd lost control of his life. And I was incredibly sad when he died. He just was such a great guy.
Let's take another short break.
Okay.